Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to Miss Lisa's Math and Science. Today we're going to be talking about biology. I want you to like, share, subscribe. I'm trying to get 1,000 subscribers so that I don't have to record then upload. I know, I'm lazy. It just takes forever. Anyway, so we're talking about biology. This is a class designed primarily for homeschoolers, but if you like the way I explain things, come on in and we'll talk about it. We're going through this book, Glencoe Biology and Everyday Experience. I like it because the vocabulary is less, so if it's a younger student wanting to do biology, they can handle it just fine. I also like it because the labs, most of them don't require very sciencey stuff. A lot of the labs you can do with stuff you can find in your backyard, like the ones we're going to do this week. And you can supplement with another book, because the big difference between this book and another book is vocabulary. So I recommend kids who are taking this for a 10th grade biology credit to get another biology book. I've got one down there on the floor, but I don't want to reach it. It's one with the zebra on the front. I think it's also a Glencoe. But and just add the vocabulary to it, and that's all you'll need to do. All right, so today we're talking about plants. Now, what is a plant? Well, plants can make their own food. They have a chemical in them that turns sunlight into energy, and it's the energy for us and for them. So all of this, the food energy on our planet, comes from the plants. They're our producers. We're consumers, they're producers. So in your book, it starts off looking with some beautiful pictures of plants that are nice and green, but not all plants are green, we're going to find out. But and you know that because in the fall they turn different colors. So the book says that there are over 350,000 different kinds of plants, so there's lots, and they have certain traits. The main one is that they contain chlorophyll, a chemical in an area of their cell called the chloroplast. And they're a chemical process called photosynthesis turns sunlight into energy. And we will talk more. This is really just an intro. These kingdoms that we're introducing right now, we're just introducing them. We're going to go back and break down a lot of the things we're talking about now. Like we're going to later talk about reproduction of plants. Ooh, it's not an earthquake. I hit the table. We're going to talk about reproduction of plants in much more detail. So we're only going to just touch on it now. Later on, once we start talking about genetics, then we're going to learn more precisely. So if this video is not what you were looking for, come back later and there'll probably be one that's in more detail. But right now I'm just releasing these weekly for my biology class. But once they're all released, they'll be up on YouTube forever. I'm not going to plan on taking them down. So anyway, so this is an introduction to plants. So plants have the green pigment in them, which is their chlorophyll, and it is in their cells. Now, another thing that makes plants different than animals is they have cell walls around their cells. And that's why broccoli crunches, like raw broccoli when you're eating it, or celery, and chicken doesn't if you're eating that. I know it's a little gross to think about, isn't it? But that's it. It's the cell wall is what gives it that crunch. Raw potatoes, a lot of our cooking will soften those cell walls. And in the South, we cook our vegetables longer than they do up north. And so ours are even mushier. I know, it's just kind of weird to Northerners how much we like to cook our vegetables in the South. You cook the green beans till they're dark green. No bright green beans. I like them okay when they're kind of not all that cooked, but the generation older than me, my mother-in-law, my grandmother, they would not eat a crunchy green bean. I remember my grandma saying that you cook them until one sticks on the bottom of the pan, and then you know that they're ready. Because so anyway, in the South, our cooked green beans don't crunch anymore, but I know up north they do. Y'all have those sauteed green beans that are still a little crunchy. And what gives them the crunch is the cell wall, and animal cells don't have it. So those are some of the characteristics of plants you're going to read about in your book. Now, how are plants grouped? They're grouped into two main categories, vascular and non-vascular. What does vascular sound like? Vascular. Sounds like veins, doesn't it? And it is the same. In us, our veins, I'm veiny. My whole life you've been able to see my veins through my skin pretty easily. But our veins carry blood through our body. And then we also have our lymph system that carries lymph through our body. So we have vascular systems in our body that carry food, minerals, oxygen, all of these things, water through our body. And plants are similar if they are vascular plants. They have tube-like things that go through them. They're not really veins like our veins and arteries, but they have these tube-like things that go through them if they're a vascular plant that carries food and water. And they're called xylem and phloem. And how you remember it is phloem carries food and phloem both sound with the F sound, and xylem carries water. So when you cut a tree in half and you see the rings, what you're seeing are these vascular bundles, the xylem and the phloem. If you've ever bit celery and then pulled it where all these stringy things come off, those stringy things are the xylem and phloem. So I don't know if we do it in this chapter or if we revisit these later. But last year when we taught biology, I had everybody get a celery stalk, cut the bottom to make it a fresh cut, and put them in water with food coloring in it. And the food coloring goes up, and then you break it and you can see the vascular bundles, the xylem and the phloem, and you can see it go into the venation all the way into the leaves. That might be something that we do later in the book when we revisit plants. Because like I said, this is just an introduction. But I remember us doing that lab last year, and I don't remember if I added it to this or if we do it later. The other two labs you're going to be doing this week are backyard labs. You're going to go find some moss, and you're going to find ferns. Now, your backyard might not have moss and ferns the way I do. You might need to go to a park and look around and try to get some moss and ferns. This is a great time of year for that, though. Right now, it's September here, and it's just a really good time to find these sort of outdoor plants, better than doing the plants in the middle of the winter when you can't find anything. You could find the moss, but you wouldn't be able to find the ferns. So the moss is a non-vascular plant, and so non-vascular plants do not have venation. They don't have the xylem and phloem, and they don't have true roots. Instead, they have hair-like things that go down into the soil, and they get their water and their minerals through osmosis. Plants make their own food, so we will talk more about what I mean by food going through the phloem. Food is made in the leaves, and it has to go down throughout the whole plant to give nutrients to the whole plant. So, but we're going to go back and we're going to look at leaves more in detail in another chapter. This is just our introduction to plants. So vascular and non-vascular are the two types of plants. So now think about it, that the vascularization is what carries what the plant needs throughout the plant. And you can think of it like an elevator in a building, that you can make buildings much taller if they have an elevator, because if there was no elevator, people would get tired. They couldn't go up too many flights of steps. They'd be having heart attacks on the way up. You'd have to do a fitness check before people were allowed to go up run up your stairs at your really tall building. So just like how buildings are limited to how tall they can be without an elevator, plants are that way too. So the non-vascular plants are very small. The little bitty mosses, if you've ever seen a moss plant gone out in your yard and looked at one, they're not big at all. There's another thing called liverworts. I know, what a name for that plant. It just sounds like liver and warts. Now, I don't like liver too much. I don't like warts, so the poor name of the liverwort plants. So anyway, they are very small because they don't have vascularization. It puts a limit on how tall they can be. But vascular plants can be extremely tall. You look at like the redwood trees in California that are just unbelievably tall. There are pictures you can go on the Google and look, and there are pictures where they have made tunnels through redwood trees where you can drive through them. They're so big. And the tree's okay. The tree keeps growing. It's so big. You can make a tunnel through it and it still lives. It doesn't instantly kill the tree. Now, eventually, maybe it's not too healthy for it, but these trees will live even with the tunnel where you can drive through them. So vascular plants can be huge. All right, so you'll be able to see in your book the tube-like cells, the xylem and phloem, and how they go up. Now, plants don't have a heart. I know I'm not surprising you with that. So how the fluids go through a plant has to do actually with the chemistry of water. Water is what is called strongly polar, meaning it has a positive and a negative end. The water is H2O, and the oxygen is very strong negative. The hydrogens are very strong positive. Opposites attract, so that makes water a sticky molecule. One water molecule will stick to another one by opposites attract. That stickiness, I know you think water's not sticky. It is in the chemical sense. And that stickiness is what causes it to be able to crawl up those trees, even big old redwood trees. It's really amazing. And when I teach chemistry, we always take a special look at the chemistry of water and how we would have no life on our planet without it. Trees could not drink, and many, many other things would happen, not only because we need water to just live, but the planet itself has to have water to support life. And the way water has its certain chemical properties make it where lakes and oceans can support life through the winter and all of these other really cool properties. So if you want to know more about that, you'll have to wait till I do that video in chemistry, because I'll talk about that in the chemistry class. But it is what allows plants to be vascular and move without a heart, move fluids through them, and it all has to do with water chemistry. This is me sticking the water molecules together. They're sticky molecules. It's why bugs can walk on water. It's because it has a high surface tension, because it's a sticky molecule. It's why raindrops ball up and don't lay flat. It's because water is a sticky molecule and it sticks in on itself. So just a very interesting little biology note there too. All right, so you're going to read more about vascular and non-vascular plants. And then they looked at the non-vascular plants, the mosses and the liverworts. I've seen liverworts before, but didn't even really think about them too much. Didn't really think about them being something different until I took biology. I was like, oh, that's what that is. But moss, I've always loved moss. I think it's so neat the way it's so soft, and you can take your shoes off and feel of it with your bare feet. And I've always liked moss. And I made a moss garden at my parents' house a long, long time ago. And then where you take all different moss and you put it out, because moss is a pioneer plant, which means it can break down bad soil and make it into good soil. So then they had a contest when I taught public school last time. I'm teaching it again, but I taught public school, stopped and homeschooled, and now I'm back to public school again. So the first time I was at public school, they had a contest for Environmental Teacher of the Year. And I entered and won with a moss garden, because my kids did a project in the outdoor classroom where we studied moss, and then we talked about how it's a pioneer plant, and the ground was terrible out at the outdoor classroom. And so we planted a moss garden, and it was so pretty. And then the kids would come back later and tell me, Miss Blackburn, my English class used the outdoor classroom, and the moss garden's still out there, and it looks beautiful. And I wonder if it's still there. I haven't been back to that school in a long time. I certainly haven't been back to the outdoor classroom to see. But anyway, I won Environmental Teacher of the Year. I'm an award-winning science teacher. And I'm not sure if it was for our school or for the county. I'm thinking it was for the county. I think my moss garden won Environmental Teacher of the Year for Cobb County. So, yay, that was fun. I got some prize, but I don't remember what it was. It was a plaque, but I think I got like a gift card too, but I don't remember. It was a long time ago. Anyway, so it was moss that did it. So you'll be reading about moss. And moss is very interesting, and we're going to talk more about the reproductive cycle of these plants later as far as genetics go. When something has a full set of DNA, it's called diploid. If it only has half the DNA, like an egg or a sperm, it's haploid. So in our life cycle as people, we are diploid, but our reproductive cells are haploid. Moss, they're weird. They go through like a big, some of these plants that we're going to look at will go through a big part of their life cycle where it's more than just a sex cell. It's like an entire plant that is haploid, and then then another part of their cycle, they're diploid, and they look very different. So it's interesting to look at how life is different on our planet. And when you study it, some of it seems really strange. Okay, so we already talked about all of that. So life cycle of a moss. It's in your book on page 118, and it is sexual reproduction. That means they have egg and sperm, male and female sex cells that are joined together, and that's called fertilization. You can see that and you're going to do the lab on page 119. You're going to be observing some moss. So you're going to have to go on a hunt and find some moss. I've got plenty in my backyard, but you got to go find your own moss. But anyway, if you look on page 120, you can see the life cycle of a moss. We can start at one point, and it has the little plants. They're like that big, and they're green, and they have leaves that go all the way around. That's called whorled leaves. And they're kind of like little slates, little flat things going all the way around. And those little plants come in male and female. And then the male produces sperm, the female produces egg, and how it gets from the male to the female is moths have to live where it's moist so they can swim. The sperm swims to the egg and fertilizes the egg. Then you've got this little female plant, and out of the top of it grows the little hair-like thing. Now, the moss in my backyard, they're red. And so it's really interesting when there's all these little red hairs that start growing over the top of the moss. And I'm hoping that's what it's like right now while you go out and observe the moss. Then at the top of the hair, the little stalk that grows out, that's the embryo. Then it makes a little ball at the top, and inside are spores. Spores form in here. Then it busts and it spreads out the spores, and you can sometimes run your hand over the moss and all this dust comes up from it. Those are the spores. Then the spores land and they grow into male and female plants again. So there's that part of the life cycle, the spore maker part, that's the embryo part, where it's not really male or female. It's just this other part of the life cycle that produces the spores. So isn't that interesting? I think it is. I think it's very cool. All right. So then we're going to talk about vascular plants. And what they talk about first are ferns. Ferns are vascular, and that makes sense. They have a stalk. They're woody. I like ferns too. I like moss better, but I like ferns. Okay. The book talks about that the vascular plants have xylem and phloem. And then it talks about ferns. It says that over 300 million years ago, most of the plants that grow on the earth were tree ferns or vascular spore plants. Now, let me tell you something about that date. We as scientists aren't as sure about those dates as it sounds. There's controversy in the scientific community. When you read a big date like that, just think a long time ago. A long time ago, there was a lot of ferns on the earth. One of the big things about dates is new research is always coming out about it. And last year, I was reading some of the new science research, and one of the ways that we date things is what is called it's nuclear chemistry, and it's something called half-life. So if you have a radioisotope, which is a chemical that it can break down into something else because it's unstable. And when it does that, it gives off radiation. So one of those is carbon-14, uranium-235. There's a lot of chemicals that have an unstable isotope, which is an unstable form of it, where it will break apart and become something else. Well, as scientists, we believed that these half-lives were completely stable and that you could make a clock, a nuclear clock with it, because the half-life of how long it takes for half of that chemical to decay was absolutely steady. You could say, well, watch on it, and you could date things by it. So we did a lot of dating with carbon-14 dating and things like that. But then I was reading some new research from last year, and who knows, maybe this research will be proven false. But new research from last year, this is 2020, so that would have been 2019, that was saying that now they think that half-lives aren't as stable as they thought, and it's not as much like clockwork as they thought. So that would make them have to rethink some of their dating. So there's always with science, things are always changing. I was talking to my husband about this earlier today, and we were talking about that teaching some subjects is easier than others, and that science, I believe, is one of the hardest ones. And he said, because science is always changing, and you're always learning, and you're always having to update and go, oh, but wait, they just learned this. Where history, it's in the past. It's not going to change. The past is done. So there's not as much. You might be learning about new, some new opinion a historian has about it, or some new document that was discovered. But it's not like how science, where it's just changing quick. And plus science, we have all the labs and stuff like that. So science has got a lot. Science teachers are busy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love teaching science. I think we have the most fun because we get to play. We get to get the lab equipment out and play. And normally in high school, you don't get to play. They don't get to play as much in English. We get to get out the fun stuff, the chemicals, and make it change colors, explode, and stuff like that. So anyway, when you read these dates in the book, just know, and also, okay, I'm a little bit old, let's be honest, and just through my lifetime of being in science, my degree's in science, it's not in education. I have a science degree, and then I went back later and got education certification. But in my lifetime as a scientist, so many things of these dates have changed. If you go back and look at a book from the 80s when I was in college, then and then go look at the book in the 90s and look in the 2000s, these dates change. And it's because the dating in particular is something that we are not completely sure of. And we're going to learn more as we get better methods. But right now, the methods aren't perfect. So just know that as you read these dates, just read 300 million years ago, read a long time ago. You don't have to worry about exactly how long ago, a long time ago. And so there used to be a commercial a long time ago, and it was for one of the oil companies for gasoline. And they showed the earth with all these ancient ferns on it, and it was like a hand drawing, and dinosaurs. And then the dinosaurs and the ferns die, and then they become oil. And so, a lot of old oil companies would have a dinosaur, because where that oil came from were these, this whatever it was like back then, when they believe it was mostly ancient ferns. So people will say, well, is my gasoline, it used to be a dinosaur? More than being a dinosaur, it was probably ancient ferns. So at Disney, they used to have a ride at Epcot. It was at Epcot, wasn't it? Yeah, I'm walking in the park and going toward it. But they had one where you would ride in a car and go in and show the dinosaurs. And it was the universe of energy, talking about these ancient ferns, or what later became our oil as they were compressed. So high pressure. So anyway, very interesting about these ancient ferns, that they're still important today, because that's our gasoline, and we like gasoline, don't we? Except it costs a lot to go somewhere, sometimes too much. I'm in the market for a car. I impulsively sold mine, and I don't have one right now. So now I'm looking around. Do I want a little car that can get good gas mileage, or do I want a big car that we can all ride in comfortably? It's a decision. I just don't know what I want to buy yet. I'm looking around. Anyway, so look on page 122. You can see the life cycle of a fern, and it is even weirder than that of a moss. It's got one part of its life cycle where what it looks like is not what you think of as a fern at all. It is a flat, heart-shaped leaf. It's got little hairs coming out of it. That is where the osmosis takes place, where it gets water and nutrients from the soil. And it's on the forest floor. It's just flat. And then from that, with that little heart-shaped leaf is where the spores grow into. And then it has eggs form on it, and it has sperm, and they get together, and a young leafy plant will grow out of that heart-shaped leaf. And then from that, the fiddleheads come up, which are ferns all rolled up when they first come up, and then they unroll, and then you've got your fern. Did you know fiddleheads, some of them are edible? And people eat fiddleheads. I've never had one, but I've seen them for sale, like pickled fiddleheads. I can say that if I do it carefully. And I've always wanted to eat one, but some people will eat the fiddleheads. We have a lot of ferns in my backyard at the creek. We have a sometimes creek. If it's rainy, we have a creek. If it's dry, we don't. So it's a sometimes creek. So you are going to look at ferns also this week. If you have a microscope, you are going to look at the spores underneath the microscope. I want you to do that. If you don't have a microscope, look at it on the internet. But I want you to see the spores of these. Then the next thing it talks about is of the vascular plants, of like the trees, we can break those into monocots and dicots, which has to do with if plants are conifers, if they make pine cones, or if they don't. Like, so you could have your pine tree versus your oak tree. And they look at the conifers. Conifers have pine cones, and in them they have the seeds. The conifer plants will have male and female pine cones. The male one releases the pollen, and in Georgia we get covered with pine pollen. And one time I had a friend who had just moved here from somewhere else, from up north, Michigan or something, and she bought a house, and she was so thrilled, and she had a screened-in porch, and she got up, and then she came to where I was, and she was like, "What happened? There's green stuff all over my porch." And it's like, welcome to the South. That's pine pollen, and it will cover everything. And she was like, "Oh, this is so gross. I was looking forward to using my porch, and it is covered in green." And it's like, yep. Up north they're like, "Oh, it snowed." We're like, "Oh, it pollened. It doesn't snow here, but it pollens." The news said it snows once on average every 2 years, but we have not had a snow in many years. At this time, maybe we'll have a big one this year, because it's been years and years since we've had snow, which I kind of like, because as a southerner I don't know how to drive in it, so it's fine with me if we don't have it, because I don't want I don't want to drive in it. I know you people up north, you're laughing at me, but it's true. It's just true. All right, so so there's the male and female. The female has the eggs. The pollen comes and blows through the air, and it gets to the female pine cone, and then the seeds form in the female pine cone, and it opens up and it drops the seeds, and then we get our pine trees everywhere. Some of them are little helicopters, is what my kids call them, where they come down and you can try and catch them out of the air. And then so pine trees, some of them there's just seeds, and they'll fall and grow into the new plant. So you can see the conifer life cycle with the male and female cones. You can tell the difference. The male cones are tighter, where the female cones are bigger and more opened. Okay, let's see. There's some different kinds of pine leaves. Conifers are very important. They supply 3/4 of the lumber to the world, and also we get important chemicals like turpentines, disinfectants, and fuel. And they're important for animals, for food and shelter. The bark, buds, and seeds of conifers are eaten by insects, birds, squirrels, rabbits, and many other animals, including people. We eat pine nuts. if you've ever had those in a salad. And we also, you can make a tea out of pine needles, and they do that some here in the South where we have all these pine trees. Another thing that's really topical about pines is right now we have COVID. We're in the middle of this pandemic. And so it's really affected our society a lot. And one of the things is that there's been runs on disinfectant. You can't find, I was at the store just a couple of days ago and looking for witch hazel. Witch hazel is it's kind of like rubbing alcohol. So I go look at the shelves and they're completely wiped out, not only of the rubbing alcohol because it kills germs, but all the witch hazel's gone too. And it's like, oh, I can't find any witch hazel. What a pain. And it's because of the COVID. And now Pine Sol is a cleaner made with pine, and they are advertising that they kill 99% of all germs. And so they will kill COVID. So they're trying to get people to buy them too, not just the Lysol that people know kills germs, but Pine Sol does too. And so they're really advertising to be germ killer, and they're a pine product. That pine, just like your book says, is a disinfectant. So that's interesting. All right, so that's the chapter. Oh no, I left out flowering plants. We will go back to flowering plants later when we do reproduction, and you will actually dissect some flowers, and we'll open them up and we will look at where the seeds are and the fruiting body and all of that. The parts of the flower, the stamen, the anthers, all of that. But all you need to know now is that flowering plants have so like if you have a flower, here's the leaves going around. In the middle part are the reproductive organs of the flower. In the very middle part, there's a part that looks almost like a pear that's pulled up. That's the female part that has the eggs in it. Around it are little stems. That's the male part, and at the top of the stems is where the pollen is formed. The pollen can be carried to another flower by a bee or the wind, or flowers can usually self-pollinate too, where they get pushed around or whatever, and the pollen. It goes down the middle part, the pollen goes down to the middle part, and it fertilizes, it's sexual reproduction. It fertilizes the eggs, and then they become the seeds. So the seeds are inside the fruiting body of the plant. So that would be any kind of plant that has seeds encased in something like that. It is like that is how it reproduces. And we're going to go, there's a lot of different kinds of seeds. You got strawberries with them on the outside and stuff like that. Corn, where the seeds are all the corn going down there, and the silk is up at the top. And we'll talk more when we come back to plants. We'll talk more about these things, and we'll look at some of these under the microscope. Most things only flower certain times of the year. And so then you can see, but I was just hearing about how in Georgia, we think of spring as our big flowering plant season, but because we're in the South and our falls are so warm, usually you can wear shorts like to November. It's so warm here. It's usually hot in September and October. It might start cooling off in November. But because of that, our fall actually blooms as much as the spring. So we have fields of flowers out there right now, blooming, beautiful, of ragweed, goldenrod. We have all these flowers blooming. People plant mums. We still have impatiens blooming. We won't get our first frost for a long time. So our fall blooming season, we have encore azaleas blooming. Our fall is actually very floral here in the South where it's real warm because we don't have frost yet. So anyway, and they say it's actually an equally long period as it is our spring, that our fall flower season is just as long. So it's not just, so a lot of plants only flower at one time of the year, but sometimes it's fall. It's not always spring. And then some things bloom just in the summer, and there's even Christmas cactus that bloom at Christmas time. So you're going to read your chapter, you're going to do your labs, and then we will do next week, we'll do our introduction chapter on animals. But all of this we're going to come back to. This is just the introduction. All right? Science is great. See you next time.